The gentle hum of holographic displays filled the advanced Sinopolitics classroom at the Interstellar Academy in Seoul. Han Bin sat at his desk, his dark eyes fixed on the shifting images of various alien species floating in the air. Each hologram showed delegates from different worlds preparing for the upcoming Galactic Summit. The classroom itself was a marvel of modern architecture, with tall windows offering a view of Seoul's skyline where traditional temples stood alongside towering skyscrapers and floating platforms. As one of only 12 human students in the academy, Han Bin often felt like he was carrying the hopes and expectations of his entire species on his shoulders. The other students in his class, mainly composed of various alien species, had centuries of diplomatic tradition behind them. Their civilizations had been part of the Galactic Council long before humans had even dreamed of reaching the stars. The Maverian students sat in specially designed chairs that accommodated their crystalline lower bodies. Their skin sparkled under the classroom lights, creating tiny rainbows that danced on the walls. Next to them, the four-eyed Fulans blinked in perfect sequence as they took notes, their gray-skinned fingers moving rapidly across their data tablets. The Aetherians were perhaps the most striking, their hair flowing and glowing with different colors that reflected their emotions, mostly showing shades of blue and green indicating their focused state of mind. Han Bin felt a slight movement in the air as the classroom door slid open. Professor Kang walked in, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by an unusually serious expression. Her steps were measured as she made her way to the front of the class. The ambient chatter died down immediately. Even the Aetherian's hair stopped its gentle wave-like motion. "Students," Professor Kang began, her voice clear and steady. "I have just received an important announcement from the Galactic Council." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "The Council has requested student representatives for the upcoming diplomatic conference. This is a rare honor. Each species will select one student to present their vision for interstellar cooperation." The reaction was immediate but subtle. The Maverian student's crystalline skin began to pulse with a soft light, a sign of excitement in their species. The Thulan's four eyes widened simultaneously, while the Aetherian's hair burst into bright yellows and oranges. Han Bin noticed several of his alien classmates throwing quick, dismissive glances his way. He had grown used to such looks over the past 3 years. "The selection process will be thorough," Professor Kang continued. "The Council will review academic records, diplomatic aptitude scores, and personal statements. The results will be announced in 1 week." That week passed in a blur of preparation. Han Bin spent countless hours in the Academy's library, studying diplomatic protocols and preparing his personal statement. He noticed how the alien students gathered in their species-specific groups, discussing strategies and sharing resources among themselves. The Maverians had access to centuries of diplomatic archives, while the Fulans consulted with their elders through long-distance quantum communications. The Aetherians seemed to spend hours in meditation, their hair flowing with deep purple hues of concentration. When the day of the announcement arrived, the entire academy gathered in the Grand Hall. The room was designed to accommodate all species comfortably, with temperature-controlled zones and gravity adjustments for different physiological needs. The tension in the air was almost tangible. The selection results appeared as a massive hologram in the center of the hall. For a moment, everyone stared at the display in disbelief. At the very top of the list, glowing in clear blue letters, was the name, Han Bin. The silence that followed was deafening. The Maverians' crystalline bodies stopped their usual subtle shimmer. The Thulan's four eyes blinked out of sync, a rare occurrence indicating shock. The Aetherian's hair turned a stark white, reflecting their surprise. Han Bin himself sat frozen in his seat, his heart pounding. He could feel the stares of everyone in the hall, some curious, many disbelieving, and a few openly hostile. The alien faculty members, sitting in their designated section, showed various signs of disturbance. A Thulan professor's skin had turned a pale gray, while a Maverian instructor's crystalline form had developed small, agitated fractal patterns. Professor Kang stood up, her voice cutting through the thick silence. "The decision is final," she announced, her tone leaving no room for argument. "The selection was made based on merit alone, following all established protocols." As the reality of the situation sank in, Han Bin realized that this was more than just a simple academic achievement. He had become the first human student ever selected to address the full Galactic Council. The weight of this responsibility settled on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He knew that his performance wouldn't just affect his own future. It would influence how the entire galactic community viewed humanity's place among the stars. As students began to file out of the Grand Hall, Han Bin remained seated, watching the hologram with his name slowly fade away. He didn't notice Professor Kang approaching until she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Congratulations," she said softly. "I hope you're ready for what comes next." Han Bin looked up at her and nodded, his determination growing stronger by the moment. "I won't let Earth down," he replied, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "No," Professor Kang smiled. "I don't believe you will." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the crystalline windows of Professor Lee's office, creating patterns that danced across the ancient wooden desk, a stark contrast to the high-tech holographic displays floating in the air. Han Bin sat perfectly still in the chair facing her desk, watching as his mentor paced back and forth across the room. Professor Lee stopped at the window, her silhouette framed against the Seoul skyline where traditional Hanok buildings blended seamlessly with modern architecture and floating platforms. She turned to face Han Bin, her expression a mixture of pride and worry. "You understand what this means?" she asked, her voice carrying both excitement and concern. "You'll be the first human student to address the full Galactic Council." Han Bin nodded, keeping his hands folded neatly in his lap. 3 years of diplomatic training had taught him to maintain composure even when his heart was racing. "I've been studying their protocols since my first year here," he replied calmly. Professor Lee moved to her desk and picked up an ancient book, a real paper book, something rarely seen these days. "The other species have been part of the council for millennia. They see us as children playing with technology we barely understand." She paused, studying his face intently. "But maybe that's exactly why you were chosen." She placed the book in front of Han Bin. It was a collection of Earth's historical diplomatic achievements. "Do you know why I still keep physical books?" she asked, running her fingers along the worn spine. Han Bin shook his head, curious about the connection. "Because sometimes the oldest methods carry the deepest wisdom," she explained, sitting down behind her desk. "The alien species, with all their advanced technology and millennia of experience, often forget the simple truths that helped their civilizations rise in the first place." A holographic notification appeared above her desk. Another message of protest from the Maverian delegation regarding Han Bin's selection. Professor Lee dismissed it with a wave of her hand. "They've been sending these all morning," she said with a slight smile. "The Maverians are particularly upset. They had expected their top student to be chosen." Han Bin remembered the Maverian student, tall, crystalline, and brilliantly intelligent. "Taeho would have been a good choice," he admitted honestly. "Perhaps," Professor Lee agreed, "but the council saw something in your application that caught their attention. Your approach to the Centarian trade dispute simulation last semester was unprecedented." Han Bin remembered that day clearly. While other students had proposed complex economic solutions based on centuries of galactic trade laws, he had suggested a simple bartering system inspired by ancient Earth markets. His solution had worked better than anyone expected. "The galaxy is changing," Professor Lee continued, activating a holographic map of known space. Thousands of stars filled the room, with different colors representing various species' territories. Earth's region was tiny, barely visible among the vast empires of older civilizations. The old ways of doing things aren't working anymore. Resources are becoming scarce in several sectors. Traditional alliances are starting to fracture. She zoomed in on a cluster of stars where 3 major species territories met. "We need new perspectives, fresh ideas. A soft chime indicated another visitor. The door slid open to reveal Yuri, Hanbin's closest friend at the academy, and one of the few other human students. Her expression was serious as she entered the office. "The Fulan delegation is requesting a meeting with Hanbin," she reported. "They want to evaluate his diplomatic capabilities." Professor Lee frowned. "They have no authority to demand such a meeting," she stated firmly. "I'll meet with them," Hanbin said, standing up. Both women looked at him in surprise. "If they want to test me, let them. It's better to face their doubts directly than let them fester." Professor Lee studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. "This is exactly why you were chosen," she said softly. "You understand something that many of the older species have forgotten. Sometimes the simplest approach is the best one." She stood and walked around her desk, placing a hand on Hanbin's shoulder. "Remember, you're not just representing the Academy or even Earth. You're representing a new way of thinking in a galaxy that desperately needs it." Hanbin picked up the old book from the desk, feeling its weight in his hands. "May I borrow this?" he asked. Professor Lee smiled. "Of course. Sometimes the best way to move forward is to look back first." As Hanbin turned to leave with Yuri, Professor Lee called out one last time. "Hanbin." He turned back to face her. "Make them remember why humans have achieved in decades what took other species centuries." Walking out of the office into the Academy's corridor, Hanbin clutched the book to his chest, his mind already forming plans for the upcoming meeting with the Fulan delegation. Yuri walked beside him, her steps matching his. "They're waiting in the diplomatic suite," she said. "Are you sure about this?" Hanbin looked at his friend and smiled. "No," he admitted, "but sometimes the best decisions are the ones that scare us a little." The afternoon sun continued to cast its patterns through the windows as they walked. But now, instead of shadows, Hanbin saw possibilities. Possibilities that might just change the galaxy's understanding of humanity forever. Through the viewport of the approaching shuttle, Hanbin caught his first glimpse of Concordia Station. The massive structure hung in space like a jeweled snowflake, its crystalline spires and organic curves blending seamlessly with metallic frameworks and energy fields. Streams of ships moved in carefully orchestrated patterns around the station, their running lights creating rivers of color against the backdrop of stars. The pilot, an AI construct with a soothing voice, announced their final approach. "Welcome to Concordia Station, Delegate Hanbin. Please secure yourself for docking procedures." As their small diplomatic shuttle glided toward its assigned bay, Hanbin observed vessels from dozens of species making similar approaches. A massive Fulan mothership, its four-sided design reflecting their species' unique vision, dwarfed several nearby craft. A Maverian crystal ship sparkled as it caught the light from the station's external illumination. The docking procedure was smooth and precise. When the airlock cycled open, Hanbin was greeted by a rush of air that carried subtle fragrances, a mixture of various atmospheric compositions designed to make all species feel at home. The station's artificial gravity adjusted automatically to Earth normal as he stepped through. A small welcoming party waited in the reception area. Among them stood Jaiyun, a human diplomat he recognized from briefing files. Her presence was reassuring, a familiar face in an overwhelmingly alien environment. She stepped forward with a warm smile. "Welcome to Concordia, Delegate Hanbin," she said formally, then added in a lower voice, "It's good to have another human face around here." As they walked through the station's main concourse, Hanbin struggled to take in everything at once. The architecture was breathtaking. Maverian crystal formations grew seamlessly into Fulan geometric patterns, while Aetherian bioluminescent panels provided both light and artistic beauty. The ceiling soared hundreds of meters overhead, creating an open space that helped prevent species with claustrophobic tendencies from feeling confined. "The station is a symbol," Jaiyun explained as they walked. "Every species contributed something to its design and construction. Even Earth, those gravity adjusters you felt when you entered. Human technology. They passed groups of various alien species going about their diplomatic duties. A cluster of Thulans moved with precise coordination, all four eyes on each face tracking different directions. A Maverian delegation glided past, their crystalline bodies refracting light in complex patterns. The initial reception was being held in the Grand Assembly Hall, a vast chamber designed to accommodate representatives from every member species of the Galactic Council. As they approached the entrance, Jai Yun pulled Hanbin aside briefly. "They're watching you," she whispered, her expression serious. The Maverian representative, Sun Ho, has been particularly vocal about humanity's premature inclusion in these proceedings. "Be careful." Hanbin nodded, straightening his formal diplomatic attire. The doors to the Grand Assembly Hall opened, revealing a space that seemed to defy the normal rules of architecture. The room somehow managed to feel both intimate and vast, with different areas subtly adjusted to suit the comfort needs of various species. As he entered, Hanbin immediately felt the weight of countless alien gazes. Sun Ho, the Maverian representative, was particularly obvious in his observation. The crystalline diplomat's facets showed patterns of barely concealed disapproval. Moving through the crowd, Hanbin engaged in careful greetings with various representatives. He used the traditional gestures he had studied so carefully: a four-fingered wave for the Thulans, a light pattern response for the Maverians, a bioluminescent color match for the Etherians. An elderly Thulan approached, all four eyes focused intently on Hanbin. "Young human," the alien said in perfectly accented Earth standard, "I was present when your species first achieved faster-than-light travel. It seems like merely moments ago." 53 Earth years, Hanbin responded respectfully, a blink of an eye in galactic terms. The Thulan's eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of approval. "Perhaps that is why you see things we do not," the alien mused before moving away. Jai Yun appeared at his side again, offering a drink designed for human consumption. "You're doing well," she said quietly, "but the real challenges haven't begun yet." Through the massive viewport behind the gathering, Earth's sun was visible as a distant point of light. Hanbin took a moment to look at it, drawing strength from the reminder of home. Around him, the future of human-alien relations continued to unfold in countless small interactions and careful diplomatic maneuvers. A soft chime indicated the reception's halfway point. Hanbin knew that somewhere in this room, alliances were being formed and opinions were being shaped that would affect humanity's place in the galaxy for centuries to come. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and moved forward to face whatever challenges awaited. The stars watched silently through the viewport, eternal witnesses to this latest chapter in humanity's journey to find its place among them. The tension aboard Concordia Station grew thicker with each passing day. Hanbin could feel it in the way different species avoided each other in the corridors, in the hushed conversations that stopped when others approached, and in the increasing number of diplomatic complaints filed with station security. At the heart of the crisis lay the Carina sector, a resource-rich region of space where three major civilizations' territories converge. The Maverians claimed ancestral rights to the crystal-rich asteroids. The Thulans had invested heavily in developing the sector's gas giants. The Etherians insisted their bioorganic colonies had been spreading naturally through the region for millennia. Hanbin found himself spending more and more time in the station's vast archive room. The circular chamber was lined with data crystals containing the recorded history of 1,000 worlds. Holographic displays flickered with information in dozens of languages, while study pods offered privacy for deep research. "You've been here for 16 hours, the archive's eye assistant noted, its voice carrying a hint of concern. "Would you like me to adjust the environmental controls for optimal human comfort?" "Yes, please," Hanbin replied, not looking up from the historical document he was studying, a 1,000-year-old peace treaty that had prevented a similar resource war in the Orient sector. The temperature adjusted slightly, and the lighting shifted to reduce eye strain. Outside the massive viewport, stars wheeled slowly past as the station maintained its eternal orbit. The artificial gravity fluctuated subtly, a common occurrence in the older sections of the station during quiet hours. A soft chime announced another visitor to the archives. Han Bin looked up to see Mike Young, one of the junior human diplomatic staff, approaching with a concerned expression. "The Fuelan delegation just filed a formal protest," she reported, settling into a nearby chair. "They're claiming the Mavarians are secretly moving military assets into the sector." Han Bin rubbed his tired eyes. "And the Aetherians. Their bioorganic colonies are expanding faster than usual. They claim it's a natural response to stress, but the others aren't buying it." The gravity fluctuated again as Han Bin stood to access another data crystal. The holographic display filled with images of previous resource conflicts and their resolutions. Most had ended in either stalemate or war. "There's something we're missing," he muttered, more to himself than to Mike Young. "The old solutions won't work here." Hours passed. Mike Young left and returned several times, bringing updates about the deteriorating situation. The Mavarian representative had stormed out of a preliminary meeting. A Fuelan warship had been spotted conducting exercises near the disputed sector. The Aetherian colonies were showing signs of developing defensive capabilities. As artificial night fell on the station, Han Bin found himself alone again in the archive room. The stars seemed brighter now, their light undiminished by the station's day cycle illumination. He stood at the viewport, watching them twinkle. A particular historical file caught his attention, an ancient Earth document about shared resource management among prehistoric human tribes. He began reading, his excitement growing as patterns emerged that nobody had considered. The gravity fluctuated more noticeably this time. Han Bin grabbed his desk for balance as the archive room's systems compensated. When he looked up again, he noticed something strange about the star patterns outside. "Computer," he called out, "show me the resource distribution maps for the Carina sector." The holographic display shifted, showing complex patterns of resource deposits and territorial claims. Han Bin compared them to historical maps, centuries of data flowing past his eyes. Cross-reference with solar cycle variations, he commanded, an idea forming in his mind. The display changed again, revealing a pattern that nobody had noticed before. The resources weren't becoming scarce. They were moving, following a natural cycle that occurred every few thousand years. The three species weren't fighting over diminishing resources. They were fighting over resources that would naturally replenish themselves if given time. Han Bin worked frantically, compiling data and preparing presentations. The solution wasn't about dividing resources. It was about timing their usage to match natural cycles. Dawn was approaching on the station when Jai Yun found him surrounded by floating displays and scattered data pads. "You look terrible," she observed, holding out a cup of coffee. Han Bin accepted the drink gratefully. "I think I found something," he said, his voice hoarse from hours of talking to the computer. "But it'll only work if all three species agree to look past their immediate concerns." Jai Yun studied the displays, her eyes widening as she understood the implications. "This could work," she said slowly, "but you'll have to convince them to listen first." Han Bin nodded, looking back at the stars. The station's day cycle was beginning, slowly brightening the archive room. In a few hours, he would have to start preparing for his speech. But now, at least he knew what he needed to say. The gravity stabilized as station systems came fully online for the day shift. Outside, ships continued their eternal dance around the station, their lights forming patterns against the darkness. Somewhere out there, in the Carina sector, three civilizations teetered on the brink of conflict, unaware that a solution lay in understanding not just space, but time itself. Han Bin gathered his materials, his mind already composing the words that might just prevent a war. The weight of that responsibility should have been crushing, but somehow, in the quiet of the archive room with the stars as his witnesses, it felt like exactly where he needed to be. The Grand Assembly chamber hummed with a nervous energy as Han Bin approached the podium. The room's architecture, designed to accommodate every species comfortably, curved upward in graceful tiers where thousands of delegates sat watching. Light filtered through crystalline panels, creating patterns that danced across the chamber floor. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. The soft whir of translation devices filled the air as they adjusted to his presence. Above, the chamber's dome showed a real-time view of space, stars twinkling against infinite darkness. Thousands of eyes focused on him, the four-eyed gazes of the Fulans, the crystalline facets of the Maverians, the bioluminescent sensors of the Etherians. Hanbin could feel the weight of their judgment. In the front row, Sun Ho's crystalline form pulsed with skepticism, while the Fulan delegation's gray skin had taken on a darker hue of disapproval. Taking a deep breath, Hanbin looked down at the podium's smooth surface. The traditional opening greetings floated there, projected for his convenience. Instead of reading them, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, worn coin, a replica of ancient Korean currency. In the year 1592, he began, his voice clear and steady. My ancestors faced an invasion of overwhelming force. The translation devices hummed as they conveyed his words in dozens of languages simultaneously. Our nation was small, our resources limited. The invading fleet numbered hundreds of ships, each larger and better armed than anything we possessed. He held up the coin, letting it catch the light. By all traditional metrics of power, we should have fallen quickly. The assembly stirred. This was not the formal diplomatic address they had expected. Even the most hostile delegates leaned forward slightly, their curiosity piqued. But one man, Admiral Yi Sun-sin, understood something fundamental about conflict and resources. Hanbin activated a holographic display, showing the design of a turtle ship. He didn't try to match the invaders' strength. Instead, he created something new. The Geobuction, or turtle ship. It was smaller than enemy vessels, but faster, more maneuverable, and virtually impossible to board. The hologram rotated, showing the ship's unique design. The turtle ship didn't just win battles, it changed how naval warfare was conducted in our region for centuries. Hanbin expanded the display to show the Karina sector. Today, we face a similar situation. Three great civilizations compete for resources that seem increasingly scarce. Each side believes they must claim these resources now or lose them forever. The Maverian delegation shifted uncomfortably as Hanbin's display highlighted their recent military movements. The Fulan's four eyes blinked in unison, a sign of intense focus. But what if, like Admiral Yi, we're looking at the problem from the wrong angle? The display shifted, showing the complex orbital patterns he had discovered in the archives. The resources in the Karina sector aren't becoming scarce. They're moving, following natural cycles that span thousands of years. A murmur ran through the assembly. The Etherian representatives' bioluminescence flickered with surprise patterns. These cycles have existed since before any of our civilizations reached the stars. The resources we fight over today will replenish themselves naturally, but only if we understand and work with these patterns instead of against them. Hanbin's display now showed a complex but elegant system of rotating harvest rights. Like the turtle ship, we don't need to fight over resources, we need to adapt how we use them. By coordinating our efforts according to these natural cycles, each civilization can harvest at peak efficiency without depleting the sector's ability to regenerate. The chamber had grown so quiet that Hanbin could hear the soft hum of the station's life support systems. He looked directly at the three main delegations involved in the dispute. The Maverians' crystalline technology is most efficient during the sector's high-energy phases. The Fulan's gas harvesting yields best results during the transitional periods. The Etherians' bioorganic colonies naturally thrive in the low-energy phases. He paused, letting the implications sink in. We're not competing for the same resources, we're trying to harvest them at the wrong times. Sun Ho's crystalline form had stopped pulsing with skepticism, now showing patterns of deep thought. The Fulan delegation was exchanging rapid glances, all four eyes moving in complex patterns of communication. My ancestors faced a superior force and survived not by becoming stronger, but by becoming smarter. Today we face resource depletion, not because resources are truly scarce, but because we haven't understood their natural rhythms. Han Bin held up the old coin one last time. This coin is worthless as currency now, but priceless as a reminder. The solution to a problem often requires looking at it from an entirely new perspective. The silence in the chamber was complete. Above, the stars continued their eternal dance, unaware that below them, a fundamental shift in galactic politics was taking place. Han Bin stood quietly, letting his words and data sink in, waiting for the assembly to decide humanity's place among the stars. The silence in the Grand Assembly chamber stretched for what seemed like eternity. Han Bin remained at the podium, his heart pounding but his exterior calm, as thousands of alien minds processed what they had just heard. The stars continued their slow dance across the dome above, indifferent to the moment of change unfolding below. Sun Ho, the Maverian representative who had been so openly dismissive of human involvement, sat completely still, all four hands clasped tightly together, a pose that in Maverian body language indicated deep contemplation. His crystalline form had taken on a deep blue hue, reflecting internal processes that few non-Maverians ever witnessed. The Thulin delegation's biomonitors, visible on small displays near their seats, showed spikes of emotional activity that exceeded normal diplomatic parameters. Their four eyes moved in rapid patterns, each set focusing and refocusing as they analyzed the data from different angles. "Impossible," a voice whispered from the Aetherian section, but in the chamber's perfect acoustics, the word carried to every corner. "The calculations, the social models, they're perfect." Jia-Yun, watching from her position among the human diplomatic staff, gripped her datapad so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The entire human section seemed to be holding its breath. The first real response came from an unexpected source. An elderly Thulin rose slowly from his seat, all four eyes fixed on Han Bin. "In 900 years of diplomatic service," he began, his translator conveying the subtle tremor in his voice, "I have never seen resource distribution patterns analyzed in this way." Movement rippled through the chamber as delegates turned to look at the speaker. His reputation as a conservative traditionalist was well known. "We have been viewing the Carina sector as a fixed resource," the Thulin continued, his gray skin shifting to a lighter shade, a sign of excitement in his species. "But it is not fixed. It breathes, like a living thing, in cycles we were too proud to notice." Sun Ho's crystalline form suddenly flared with brilliant light, a Maverian gesture of revelation. "The energy patterns," he said, his voice resonating through the chamber, "they align perfectly with our harvesting technologies. We wouldn't be competing for resources, we would be working in harmony with their natural cycles." The chamber erupted in multiple conversations, each species reacting in their own way. The Aetherian's hair flowed with colors never before seen in diplomatic meetings. The Thulin biomonitors continued to show unprecedented readings. Han Bin remained at the podium, watching as centuries of diplomatic tradition transformed before his eyes. The data displays he had prepared continued to rotate slowly, showing the elegant dance of resources through the sector. A young Aetherian diplomat approached the podium, her hair flowing with colors of curiosity and hope. "Your species," she said, her translator struggling to convey the complex emotions in her natural language. "You achieved in decades what we could not see in millennia." "How?" Han Bin smiled gently. "Sometimes," he replied, "being new to a problem allows you to see it without the weight of traditional solutions." The chamber's attention focused again on him as he continued. "Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our intelligence. It's our ability to look at old problems in new ways. We had to learn this lesson countless times in our own history." Sun Ho rose from his seat, his crystalline form now pulsing with regular patterns of calm certainty. "I move that we immediately begin implementing the human cycle protocol in the Carina sector," he announced formally. The Thulin elder raised all four hands in agreement. "Seconded," he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of diplomatic authority. The voting displays lit up across the chamber, species after species registering their support. The traditional waiting period for such decisions was being ignored in the rush to embrace this new perspective. As the approval numbers climbed, Hanbin felt a light touch on his arm. Jai Yun had made her way to the podium, her eyes shining with unshed tears of pride. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." Hanbin looked up at the stars visible through the chamber's dome. Somewhere out there, the Carina sector continued its ancient cycles, unaware that its resources would now be harvested in harmony with its natural rhythms instead of being fought over. The final vote tally appeared above the podium. Unanimous approval, the first in Galactic Council history. As the chamber erupted in expressions of support and congratulation, Hanbin thought of that ancient admiral and his turtle ships, wondering if somewhere, somehow, his ancestor was smiling at this new innovation born of necessity. The ripples of this moment would spread far beyond the Carina sector, changing not just how resources were managed, but how species viewed each other in this vast, complex galaxy they all shared. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Interstellar Academy in Seoul, casting long shadows across the classroom floor. 2 weeks had passed since the historic Concordia Summit, and the galaxy was still buzzing with the implications of what had become known as the Hanbin Protocol. Hanbin stood at the front of his old classroom, no longer a student, but a guest lecturer. The room was packed beyond capacity. Human students sat shoulder to shoulder with Maverians, Fulans, and Etherians. The air hummed with translation devices and environmental adjusters, creating a symphony of cooperation. The holographic displays showed news feeds from across the galaxy. The Galactic Council's formal adoption of the protocol had sparked a wave of changes. Resource disputes in 3 other sectors had already been resolved using the same principles. 12 major species had sent formal recognition of humanity's contribution to galactic peace. "When I sat where you're sitting now," Hanbin began, gesturing to the seats before him, "I never imagined I would be standing here today. I was just a student trying to understand how our species fit into this vast galaxy." A young Maverian student raised her crystalline hand, light refracting through her form in patterns of curiosity. "Is it true that you discovered the resource cycles by accident?" Hanbin smiled, remembering that long night in the Concordia archives. "The patterns were always there," he replied. "We just needed to look at them differently. Sometimes the biggest discoveries come from asking the simplest questions." The classroom's holoprojector activated, displaying a real-time view of the Carina sector. The once contested region now showed signs of coordinated activity. Maverian crystal harvesters working during high-energy phases, fuel and gas collectors operating in transition periods, and Aetherian colonies flourishing in low-energy cycles. "The galaxy," Hanbin continued, "is not divided by species or technology. It's united by ideas. And sometimes the youngest voices carry the oldest wisdom." A Fulan student blinked all 4 eyes in sequence, their way of showing deep thought. "But how did you know the other species would listen? They had ignored similar proposals for centuries." Hanbin walked to the window, looking out at the Seoul skyline where ancient temples stood alongside modern structures and floating platforms. Because every species, no matter how old or advanced, shares one basic truth: the desire to solve problems and make things better. The Academy's corridors outside were bustling with activity. Applications had tripled since the summit, with species that had never before considered Earth-based education now sending their brightest students. The ancient institution was adapting, growing, evolving. "Your generation," Hanbin said, turning back to face the class, "will face new challenges. You'll have to find new ways to look at old problems. But remember this: innovation doesn't always mean creating something new. Sometimes it means seeing what's already there in a different way." As if to emphasize his point, the sunlight caught the crystal formations that had been added to the classroom walls, a Maverian architectural touch that somehow made the traditional space feel more complete. "The protocol wasn't just about resource distribution," he continued. It was about showing that every species, no matter how young or old, has something valuable to contribute. The Maverians taught us about crystal harmonics. The Thulans showed us mathematical patterns we never imagined. The Etherians helped us understand biological rhythms on a galactic scale. A human student raised her hand. And what did we teach them? Han Bin thought about the ancient coin he had shown at the summit, now displayed in the Concordia Museum of Galactic Cooperation. We taught them that sometimes the best solution is the simplest one. That looking at a problem with fresh eyes can reveal answers that have been there all along. The class ended, but the students lingered, discussing ideas and sharing perspectives in a way that would have been unimaginable just weeks ago. Han Bin watched them, seeing in their interactions the future he had hoped to help create. Outside, the sun continued its journey across the sky, its light falling equally on humans and aliens alike. In orbit above, ships from a dozen worlds moved in careful harmony, their paths echoing the very principles that had inspired the protocol. Han Bin gathered his materials, ready to head to his next lecture. As he reached the door, he paused, looking back at the empty classroom. The sunlight had shifted, creating new patterns on the floor, patterns that, like so many things in this vast galaxy, had always been there, waiting for someone to see them in a new way. The future was unfolding, one idea at a time, and humanity had found its voice among the stars. Not through force or technology, but through the simple power of looking at the universe with fresh eyes and an open mind.